deal. And I have an extra ticket to bring you to Mexico. It was excellent. And actually, props to UCLA, which was supportive of the film by wanting to create, as part of the archive about Ron, a really coherent long form interview. And so it was UCLA that commissioned me to do the interview that you see of Ron throughout the film. And then they took me to Mexico, and then we went to, by then we were, as Cross keeps saying, we were like this. You know, so the whole sort of ball rolling through town. It was really funny. I kept trying to film the people we were walking by because they were all just like, what's going on? Is it a parade? So I think the first time, actually, that I saw Ron was with my friend Sarah Pettit. We went and saw him at PS 122, remember? And Julie, and you got that huge hematoma on your head that night. It came in, and I was like, that's not how it's supposed to go. And it was really big. But it was my honor and my pleasure. I could listen to Ron all day.
What was the majority of the footage of the performance documentation from that show in Mexico? That was like another question I had.
Well, we did, obviously, the Deliverance part was all in Croatia, which was at the very end. There is some archival, so Pig in the triangle, in the pyramid. There's two versions of that. So you see, we tried to make the first part, Martyrs and Saints, look like it wasn't in Mexico. And then Four Scenes looked like it was, and then Deliverance was in Croatia. But Mexico was extraordinary because they hosted the entire thing. And they put during, as they said, in the intermission, part of Deliverance was performed in that. I mean, that was an amazing place.
So it was like a 6-hour night.
It was a really long night. Yeah.
Wow. All right, Papa Ron. I know that.
I feel like it was too much work to see. I'm overwhelmed.
I mean, that's really where I wanted to start. I know that, like, as a creator of anything, your subject position is constantly moving forward, right? And when you revisit a piece of your past, it always looks different. It looks different every time. The story continues to change. So how did it feel watching it tonight? Like, what bumped you? What stuck out? What were the things that...
I think the immediacy of how we're responding to AIDS, and also that everybody was dying so fast, and a lot of people are dead that are in that story. And I think after we did film festivals with this, there was this period where I had so much emptiness from death that I didn't want to think about this. What I kind of embraced the post-AIDS period. AIDS is over. Everyone's dead. Only lame people live through it. The bitches. Well, just sometimes I would be that harsh, but it's hard to understand missing pieces in your psyche because too many people have been taken away. And there's also other things, like these kind of intense times form communities that are so close-knit. Nothing would hold those communities that close together when you're not right in the middle of that. So I feel like some of us also never got over holding people that close and being so acting out emotionally in public with petting and touching. And I think the sexual energy was also in response to the morbidity of that time, that it was a hypersexual time as well, because it was at the extremes.
And one of the things that I was so struck by, and I'm just forming the thoughts as I speak, the multiplicity, like, within this group, you know, the fact that it was various types of queers. And I was thinking about just gender subversion within that. It was the kind of like pre-trans movement. And I was thinking about trans communities today have kind of really distinguished themselves as, you know, like a separate entity. And I was wondering if, you know, a group of dykes and fags and gender subverters could come together under these kinds of practices of body modification and, you know.
I feel like there's an arc of polymorphously perverse where we all come together and then separate again. I do believe it's high time for another time of mixed play, yes.
What was what I have
But I
questions.
think it's true that idea of how extreme, we were talking about at dinner, how extreme we were and how extreme we acted and what we said and what we did and how we looked. And it was in reaction to, there was like it was a void on the other side. It was like living on a flat earth. And it was just the edge of it was so close to us. And I mean, people were dying every day. It's impossible to communicate to somebody who hasn't been through something like that, either from being old. You know, my mother has that now. So she's got friends die all the time. And she's like, this is like you. But I remember that at the time she was so hyper protective and she was so upset and inexperienced with how to help a 20-year-old deal with the fact that all my people were dying. And I think that is, you know, when you say we just watched this, you know, encyclopedic film about everything Ron did, like there's a film now, I forget what it's called, a young baby who's sick, but it's a game, Play Me or something. But it's this animated game that a dad made when his son was born with a terminal illness. And he talks about wanting to film everything. And I think I felt like that. Like, I'm just going to film it all because then it won't ever disappear. You know, and the little bits that we had of Cliff, I mean, think about it. We probably have all the footage there is of Cliff is in that 15 seconds because people just didn't have footage of themselves. And so in that way, you know, at the beginning I thought, oh, right, this is a really long film. I wonder if everyone realizes that.
Late 90s zeros till it changed.
Yeah.
And Bob, what was your relationship to documentation? I know that, you know, with live performance, there's always kind of like a question of what do you want documented? How do you want it documented?
I always hated it because you'd have this amazing experience and then look at this like early 90s really flat gray video and just be like, wow, it was that slow or that flat. You know, it's hard for me, but I learned to kind of work with it. You know, like to see how to correct things. But also I noticed sometimes the gaze of the camera is harsher than the live experience, especially in those big tableau pieces. You could look at whatever you want to, but the camera person would only look at the most grotesque moment, you know, what was the center when that's not actually the way you view something in multiples.
Where people can choose who to settle on. But I remember part of the close-ups was because in the first, when they put up Martyrs and Saints in the Exteresa, it was in a long, each part was done in a different part of the church. And this was in that long, long room. And so they were afraid that people wouldn't be able to see all the stuff the nurses were doing from the back. So we put monitors throughout.
CCTV.
Yeah, and so while I was filming and recording, they were actually projecting, which is why I have all those real close-ups on Pig's mouth and each of the cutting open. But also remember, I fell off the stage. That was my dramatic contribution. And yeah, me and Cross walked to the edge and fell off because they turned all the lights off. But it's true that you go in and you sort of pick what to look at and where to focus.
If we were doing it today, it would be it would be a terrific virtual reality experience. Catherine, I was so impressed with your incredible canon of films, especially predating 1996. I mean, it seems like Hallelujah was kind of a turning point within your oeuvre. But for 15 years before that, you were so dedicated to AIDS activism and kind of really creating awareness campaigns through filmmaking. How do you see your kind of like relationship to activism and art making?
I ask myself that question every day because and I just fall back on this idea that the video camera really functions as my journal. Mm-hmm. And there was a new article that Donna Minkowitz just wrote about the original article she wrote in the Village Voice about the murder of Brandon Tina. Mm-hmm. And she is the one who wrote the thing about how Brandon had been abused as a child. And therefore had turned to being a lesbian or didn't want to be a lesbian, didn't want to be. There was just this way, this sort of convoluted way that she had tried to make sense at the time. And Richard Goldstein was her editor at The Voice. And she wrote this, I thought, pretty interesting piece last week about how she really got it wrong. And there wasn't a language at that time for talking. And one of the films that I'd made before Hallelujah was called 'Cause It's Boy. And it was just me and my roommates and my lover talking about the Brandon Tina case. And it,
It's on your website.
Yeah, is it up? You can stream it?
Yeah, I think so.
Good, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's because I did a few in England and Scotland recently. They did these retrospectives of those early short pieces, which people don't usually ask about. They talk about the Chavella or Born to Fly or something. But so it was cool to see it again and to see this language. It was like this, and you asking about trans in this, or even with Chavella, people saying if she were alive today, would she have been trans? Which I thought was such an odd question, because you can't just take people out of their history and put them into a different place and have it be any kind of meaningful. So, but I think it's just that, and it was just recording and not thinking there was going to be any reason to make a long film or to make a film for anybody outside of us. When we started in ACT UP, there weren't very many cameras. The mainstream media was doing that isolating thing, like, here they are all alone, so sad, so skinny, so dead. And we were like, wait, look at all of us. We're happy and together and sad and skinny and living and dying and all these things. And look, let's us just make it. We literally made our first ACT UP videos for people in ACT UP to take home with them during the holidays to Nebraska or wherever they were from, and show their families what their lives were like. Because if you turn on the TV, you wouldn't have seen it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was ACT UP New York.
Yeah, that was in ACT UP New York.
Ron, what was the landscape like here in Los Angeles, and what was your kind of engagement with art and activism?
I'd say I was more part of the when Queer Nation overlapped with Club Fuck. I always felt like a criminal. Like, what am I gonna go protest for? I'm gonna lower the tone when I go out there, like looking just out of jail. I don't know. I never felt good as a digit. So I had a different kind of activist. I went to a few protests, but I never felt like I was valuable on the street. I think it was always more on a personal level. And I looked the way I looked even in the early 80s. So I was walking around Pomona getting bottles thrown out of me out of cars. I paid the fucking price. Again, it goes back to the mortality, though, that everyone was dying. There was nothing to lose. There was no reason to be polite. And then this gift of jouissance happened, that really was embracing pleasure in the middle of activism, in the middle of dying, in the middle of pain and pleasure. And we had, of course, the Bob Flanagan and Sherry Rose in our midst during those times, too.
How was the film received when it came out? What was the life of the film and the immediate, following the immediate release?
Well, I remember the New York Times review. It did what they do when they don't want to criticize a film, so they just describe it. Because, they don't want to give you any adjectives that you can quote from. So the headline was like flogging, branding, cutting. Like, it was literally like 6 gerunds. I was like, well, that's what the film has. It did play on Mexican television, which we were totally blown away. And I thought it was instructive, too, when Mario says that, in Croatia, people are so used to death that to them it translated like what deliverance was about. It didn't matter how people were dying. It was
This
that.
is true. We had a lot of feedback from people. The war there were still peacekeepers holding peace, at that point. And I had went a few years earlier when the war actually was still on to set that up and could barely get in. So, yeah, there were much older men, like in their 70s, crying over just loss, like in a general way, which I found I like that expansion. You know, I'm not the center of the universe in this. I never saw AIDS as the only thing going on. I could see and still see bigger than that.
Yeah.
So that was the first time, though, that it was really outside of that, because we had a strange kind of split in audience with some crossover of GLBT, AIDS activists, and then just gnarly tattoo dudes.
Yeah, we also got, though, I was always amazed at the people who were raised in evangelical religions and across the board, and I still have friends who I find out they were, and then we talk about this film, and then they borrow it, and they love it, and they don't have any tattoos, and they're, you know, whatever. But I think people can identify with that vaudevillian notion you were talking about, and what is it if it's not God? And you have to come up with some way to make sense. And you can do that in a lot of different ways.
I mean, this is also, it's interesting for me just to look at still how much I talk about religion in this piece and try to, in a different way, move away from it into something more generic like mysticism, but then came back in a theological way and have participated on queer theology conferences in different places and taught at a religious school in Shreveport. I fit in. I love it. I don't mind Southern Christians. Hug it out. Get a drive-through daiquiri at 11 p.m. and sit in the parking lot of the casino and drink it.
We premiered at the Rotterdam Film Festival. That was a lot of fun. And we did have a theatrical release, but it was pretty limited.
Was it
I
just in
did
New York and LA,
the
or-
mix Brazil tour with the film, too. So I did Curitiba and Sao Paulo.
I mean, so it went around, and then it was available on DVD, and you could buy it. It was Kim's Video carried it until
There
they
was still
shut
the
down.
video shop. And that,
Go to Kim's and take off the VHS.
What happened to the revival tent idea? Why has that not happened yet? Can we make it happen?
We felt broken and moved to 2 different countries. But we need. I'll just show her that clip and try to relight the fire.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could get a lot of momentum behind that for sure. I think
Time
that's
for the tent. Just wasn't time right then.
yeah. America needs that revival tent, that Ron Athey vaginal
tent.
Davis revival tent. I mean, can you imagine? It would be a hit.
I always have a headache from producing things. Don't we, Nacho? Me and Nacho have an event on Sunday, Dolores, Our Lady of the Seven Sorrows, if you want to see something good at 7 p.m. downtown.
Yeah. Where's it going to be, and how can people find out about it?
The Vortex and RestlessNights.com has the ticket info.
Cool.
I thought I'd share that.
I think that's good. Some live.
Do you all from the audience have thoughts, pressing revelations, yearnings,
Questions,
inspiring questions?
Rhetorical questions.
Ew. Flirtation from
When
the
are the
audience.
auditions for the next live show?
should
I
have-
think
Like an
Auburn
audition tonight.
Pictures needs to make a link online for that.
I know. I think you can stream it. I think you can stream it. There's a little paywall, probably $4 or something. But auburnpictures.com, AUBIN pictures.com, and Catherine at auburnpictures.com. If you can't find it, you can remind me because I'll have to check. It was 21 years ago. But I think it's about, we definitely still sell the DVDs. And after things like this, everybody in the office is like, what happened? Because we're out of Hallelujah DVDs. So something will happen in England and suddenly we'll get, orders for 30 different DVDs in England. We know that somebody showed it.
Yeah, and the DVD has this incredible director's commentary
Does it?
as well.
Is it us together? Is it just me?
think I did it.
No.
I think it's just you.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay, don't listen to that. I have no idea. Yeah, there's someone.
So since there is not a Blu-ray yet, you should do one and have you both with commentary. Just an idea. But you said that there was CCTV cameras, and you obviously did this on 35.
was video, right?
or video?
It was, some of it was video. We printed it on 35.
This
It
was
does
a print.
exist
We
as
just watched a
35.
print.
Okay,
We
so
watched
Yeah,
the
that
film.
was a print. But there's some Super 8 I shot in Mexico. You can see it. I run the
Yeah.
Super 8 sound.
so I'm curious if there's any like other footage that you would then put on the Blu-ray. that
Well,
you're
as a
gonna
matter
put
of
out so I can
fact,
buy it.
there's all the extra footage is at the UCLA archive. And to my understanding, you can go there and watch it. Is that
Do we have
correct?
an answer from UCLA?
Is that at ARSC? Okay. Okay.
Wow.
And that would be everything, not just the interview, but they then, I gave them all the footage to archive.
So there
Like
would be
everything I shot in Mexico, they would have everything.
so we could basically get the full.
Well, you probably couldn't
interview.
take it.
No,
I
no,
mean,
but
but
go
you
and
could watch
watch
it.
it?
Yeah, you could watch it.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So Blu-ray though. Thanks.
Okay, we'll work on the director's cut. Yeah, there we go.
Could you actually, for a minute, Paul, could you tell us about the other Ron Athey work that the UCLA archive has? I think they have everything. Yeah. Okay, there's some
Okay.
there's some sidebar conversation. Okay.
Bradford?
My question has to do with kind of what Pigpen says at the end when Pigpen says, you know, before Ron dies, and this kind of sense of urgency that takes place that you kind of feel throughout the film, and your expressed desire to get this body of work done before you died. Was there a moment where something clicked? Or, you know, how did, what was the sort of timeline of trying to get this work done before your sort of inevitable death that you're talking about, sort of, and then a realization that you were going to keep working? And how does that
1996 to 1997, the three therapy, suddenly we weren't at funerals or hospitals anymore. So it actually really was like this line where it just stopped. And that's when I started working on the Solar Anus. I thought, no, let me do something intellectual now with my hull. Instead of emotional, the intellectual hull. I don't know, I was weary of it by then. You know, that's a long time to like push yourself into a symbol of that kind of, I don't know, philosophical angst. And also traveling with 10 people all the time. Like being Papa all the time. They're getting crabby. I also had never done solo work, so this suicide bed where I put all the needles in my arm, that's actually one of the moments where I saw that on video. And I understood sometimes when you peel things away, it becomes stronger. So I was also just curious to work in a different form that wasn't in a theater company form. But it's scarier. With more fabric and more people. Kind of, even if it's awful, it's like the Cockettes or something. But to strip it down, even like the pathos is mono. You know, you're responsible for that. So I think that sent me in a direction, which I kind of go back and forth because it's you know, that's also not interesting enough for me.
But it was also because nobody in the States would let him put up a show anymore.
Yeah,
After
after
the
the Walker, I was properly blacklisted for 10 years. I would self-produce to do a work in progress, but I would not pay to play. Also, they didn't even want me to because the Walker didn't use money. It was just that the venue is sponsored by NEA. It was such a thin premise. I realized, you know, they can just come after you. So everyone was Nelly. And then I thought, why am I defending the NEA and the Walker? If they're afraid to show anything, maybe they should close. You know, well, to hold on to that little bit of money that eventually pinched off to nothing and not think of alternatives and sink the space with, you know, management that won't evolve. You know, sometimes the vision does have to change, and that was weird to be in the middle of that because I didn't consider myself in the caliber of the NEA4. I'd never applied for a grant. I had never come out of the academy. You know, I didn't come out of a group of artists, but when I collaborated with people, I learned. You know, I learned so much from Julie. I learned so much from various types of technicians that we worked with special effects SM people. Well, I learned things properly. I didn't, you know, what would happen if I put this dirty water in my nutsack? You know, I wasn't that stupid. I got good advice.
It's funny that you mentioned the suicide scene, because it was like in my seat. That was I remember shooting that, like, nothing ever bothered me, having the camera between me. Like, I was wide open eyes. I could watch anything. Nothing hurt except that scene, and it still did tonight. Like, there was, and maybe it is because you're alone, or because I know what a turning point that was, or that you're doing it to yourself, and all those needles all at once. But even tonight, watching it, and that scene is hard to watch even through the camera lens.
You just mentioned technicians, and I was really kind of overwhelmed actually by the scores, the music, and in Deliverance, I suddenly felt like I was inside an MRI machine. Was it based on an MRI machine, that beeping and booming, and how?
Some of that was, yeah. There was a MRI, and also I refer a lot to EEGs. I had monthly EEGs through my childhood. So there's this thing when you have these kind of like needles in your head and the things, and grinding sounds and the hallucinogenic goggles on. Yeah, I was deeply involved in neurological treatment to maintain a Valium prescription when I was a kid. That's the truth. 4 times a day from when I was 9. But just to go further about music, is I also worked with a series of musicians. A lot of them died from the early ones in a band called Drance. But I also worked with Barry Adamson, always with that violinist Julie Fowles. You know, and then later in the 00 started actually working with opera and classical people.
Were you able to travel, I guess, before you left Los Angeles and tour some of your work? If so, how long did you do that for? And what's it like to be back in LA?
Oh, about traveling to work, you mean? Yeah, I didn't start traveling at all. I never left like LA County until, you know, or Southern California until I was in my early 20s. So it's kind of late to traveling. So I think because of having a reason to travel always made travel more exciting to me than thinking you have to see the Eiffel Tower because you're in Paris. Like, you have hosts that show you the properly dodgy dark rooms and rivers and things that are nice to see. I found places like, I don't know, I adapted well. Like, the first time I went to Croatia, I could hardly get in the early 90s, and there was nothing to eat except synthetic gelato. Like, absolutely nothing else. So you'd have like 3 bowls. It'd be like, but, you know, not crybabying about it because I wasn't smart enough to bring a suitcase full of nuts. I don't know. I just, you know, same thing in Slovenia. I just had different kinds of experiences in those places, and was fairly addicted to it. If I was home for 3 months, I was like rocking myself because it wasn't stimulating enough. England always was a home away from home, and the work was received almost parallel the way it was received in LA. And so it was kind of a natural move for me when I did move there and lived there for 6 years and came back 3 years ago. Basically, I couldn't live in a miserable motherfucker place. You know, I thought, God, I miss happy, stupid people. And so, remembering like a different LA with cheap rent where you could just like be hot and walk around in panties and and a spray bottle in the summer, and everyone had a lot of free time. Now I think I'm still deciding, like, God, this like power bitch New York. I don't know. LA turned into New York. I don't know if I like it. No one has any time. Everyone's like bend over backwards to play around on a hole. Yeah. Anyway, the places change, but I feel at a dilemma about what's next. Like where I would want to. Do I always want to like take an hour and a half to drive across town? I feel like I'm gonna fucking scream. I'll be 57 in December. Fuck this.
But it was amazing how everywhere you went, you picked up people. Like they would come and join the group and then show up at the next performance. They'd come across states and be like, here I am, I'm ready. And Katya and that guy at the end, I forget.
Those are those fun like art families, like international art families. You know, I still see a lot of those people. If we go to Madrid, people come over from nearby.
Also, you have something, but does the mic want to go up there? While you're walking up there, I was going to say hi to Divinity, who's here with us. You're going to stand
Divinity,
up.
do you want to come up here and say some words?
There you are.
I thought you.
And the Divinity still works with me. We just worked on Gifts of the Spirit opera. Divinity and Lisa were both in that, and so we worked with a lot of singers, and then with you know the core people.
Well, so I checked our public catalog. The only other title I can find that Ron has a credit on in our public catalog is Hustler White, which we should probably show to at some point. But we had been.
When are you showing? There's
we
a
haven't
Dirty
showed
Looks
yet,
of
but-
Hustler White. What is that night?
Okay.
July 12th at the. Oh, the studs that used to be the Tomcat, that used to be the Pussycat.
Yeah,
on Santa
you may be
Monica Boulevard.
familiar with that.
I know everything 5 deep.
But it did lead me to. It did lead me to think about another question, though. I mean, as an artist, you have to be creating, you have to be thinking about your next work, you have to be thinking about where the funding is from that work, and so oftentimes the last thing maybe on your list is documenting and archiving your own career, and how much of that has been something you've taken on, and how are you proceeding with that process?
Sometimes that's the thing I drop the ball on, because I can barely get the project together by the deadline, and all of a sudden, you know, and I have a long history of experiences with people I don't ever want to photograph my work and try to sell it back to me, or take control of the footage and make a lame-ass project out of it, or it sounds something exploitive. Yeah, people, even you do like a nice photo shoot where they serve you like Goo Goo Eyes one to tabloid press. So I guess, yeah, I'd love to be a control freak and control every element of it, but I actually move through work faster than that, so I'm not that precious. I archived everything almost on accident. It was just because I had a massive garage that actually was too shallow to park the car in. So everything, and I was in the same house from '90, so it's just like pack it in. And then only a year ago was evicted from that house. So that archive is being shaped up into a show that'll be at ICA LA 2020 sometime. So that's a massive job to look at all that work.
And you're also in the process of transitioning much of it to the Getty.
Yeah, it's not announced yet.
Blowing up your spot. Tell no one.
I also, it's interesting. I think doing the book, Pleading in the Blood with Dominic Johnson, this is one of the things I did when I lived in England, is when I started pulling pieces of archive that had been missing, things that had been borrowed, stolen, things that were locked up in garages, like begging people to dig for the film, even back to 1980. It just got, 80s were almost impossible. It's just like a little handful of stuff. And even the first half of the 90s, the quality of things or the amount of things started picking up. And then all of a sudden with self-obliteration and the later 2000s, all of a sudden I have like 90,000 pictures of the same performance, and I'm a really bad editor, so I just look at it and just like, I could never edit a video of myself. I can't look at it that long. It drives me crazy.
Self-obliteration was so bloody also, like compared to the performances in Hallelujah.
That
It
was,
was like, oh, you really popped an
I
artery
felt
in that New York
rebellious when I was
performance.
approaching turning 50. I was just like, fuck you, 50, fucking 50. I'm not going to put it away. I'm not going to say anything positive.
Thank you, Mike person.
So great seeing the film. It's the first time I've seen it. So in the film, Bob Flanagan and Sherry Rose are mentioned, and then you mentioned them a little bit earlier. And since I have a little bit of a personal connection,
Is that Matt
with
Levin,
them-
Sherry
Hey,
Rose's
hey,
son?
whoa! It's a
Really?
surprise. No, I just thought I would ask you about the early days with them a little bit, and maybe how you mentioned them, you being in the midst of them, and maybe how you were influenced by them, and maybe how they were influenced by you.
Okay, before you answer, because my answer is tiny and meaningless. The Sicko came out, right?
Sick.
Sick, sorry. I know, that's a different film.
Sicko's a
Sick,
totally different film.
Totally different film. Sick came out, what I meant was Sick, came out right before this one. And it was, and it was so well received, I thought. Like, and I loved it, and all these people were watching it, and I thought, people can handle this. And
Yeah.
so that's the only influence it had on me, was making me feel like this movie could be made and there'd be audiences for it.
I would run into your mother at kink events, and she would have her camera. Before I knew Bob, and Bob worked at the Gauntlet. So I knew them in different places, and I started hearing, through the Beyond Baroque series. I know Bob did readings, but when he joined the readings to the physical actions and also had comedic genius, so he narrated his own situation. It was a turn on. Also, the release of the book Modern Primitives, that's what changed the face of how everyone looked. But Bob performed Nailed there at Olio. I don't even know what horrible coffee shop is there on Sunset next to what used to be Le Barcito, used to be Basco's, used to be Tabasco's, like 2 doors down. Anyway, that was some guy named Julian had this gallery he hardly ever used. And like Bob did that there. Then the next year, the actress Karen Black sang these show tunes that had psychosexual hidden meanings, tears streaming down her face. Really amazing. Anyway, we were definitely in cahoots. I was in New York when they did Sick Room at the New Museum, and of course saw it in Santa Monica here, and then it intersected with 9 Inch Nails in them in that period as well. So yeah, we're in that time.
Definitely, thanks.
But I saw Sherry as having also this documentary role from really early leather parties. Like I remember back quite early actually.
Thanks.
And we're getting the time signal from the back. So if you have any last thoughts, you're going to have to express them privately to us on the patio. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much,
Thank
Catherine,
you,
for flying
Zackary.
here. Thank you,
Thank
Papa
you.
Ron.